G'day guys, and welcome to another Phil and Jen in the Philippines. Thanks very much for joining me today. This is the first video after we've reached our 1,000 subscribers, and I'd just personally like to thank everyone that's on board at the moment, and I'm looking forward to many more joining. The vlog today is going to be a little bit lighthearted in one respect. It's not going to be me telling you all the negatives about this country and only some of the positives. It's more an informational video. It won't be applicable to a lot of you guys, but it's a little bit of information that may assist a lot of guys that come out here, and that's the possibility of building your own house here, and some of the experiences that I went through and some of the research that I did, and it may save a lot of time. So today's video, before we start, subscribe of course, thumbs up, comment, like the comments, share, and we'll get on with it from now. Well, as you're well aware, in previous videos, Jen and I built our residence over here, and we built it out of containers for a number of reasons. One, as I outlined beforehand, the consideration was what we had available to us and the area we were living in at the time. These are all considerations. But since building that particular building and seeing the shortcomings of that building as well as the positives, and I think if anyone's been involved in building of any description, by the time they finish the project, they'll realise what they should have done and what they didn't do. And you know, if they could have had their opportunity over again, well, yeah, I always thought along the lines that if I didn't get it right the first time, I'd do it a second time, because building here is free of a certain amount of restrictions that you get in the West, and you're really free to do virtually anything you want, as long as it makes sense, and as long as you follow the government rules and regulations, which are quite loosely framed in this country. As I said, the reasoning, I won't go into the reasoning why I built my house and and where I built it and whatever, but it is the dream of many expats that come over here that eventually decide, yes, I'm going to stay here for a period of time, whether it be a number of years, a long time, or for the rest of their lives, and they'd like to have a crack at building their own premises, or at least having the premises built on their behalf to their own specifications. I'm not suggesting anything I say is right or wrong. I'm just giving you some ideas that I came across and some realizations that had I done it in a different way with different materials, it could have been, one, a lot easier, two, probably a lot more functional, and a lot of the preconceived ideas I had in relation to the house I wanted weren't really necessary the longer I stayed in this country. The first thing I think, we're going to run into a situation where people aren't confident about the prospects of building their own house because they've never done it before. Well, this is a country that, you know, if you show enough gonads and you have the will and whatever, you may not have to drive every nail and turn every screw, but you can at least direct the building of that particular dwelling in the vision that you have in your head, and you can get other people to do it. Now, this is one way of doing it. You can choose a house over here and have professional builders to the standard of the Philippines build the house, and that's another dream fulfilled. But you're going to run into a series of problems, and I hope to, you know, we can shortcut a lot of those problems. The first thing is the design. Being an Australian coming from a first world country, my country is going through a situation where it's very difficult to buy a spec-built house or a home of any description, a modern home, that isn't smaller than about 4 bedrooms. Whether you're single and no kids and whatever, it's just not economically viable, and the banks don't particularly promote it, that you build anything smaller than 4 bedrooms, because we're under the assumption these days that you go through a series of houses in your life, you know, and you progress by going up and up and up and getting capital gains and going on to a bigger and better house. So what's happened now is they really promote starting at a 4-bedroom house, which is ridiculous, but gone are the days of the 2-bedroom houses. And in fact, a lot of the time it's a pre-built house, a speculative house that a builder's built, it's very difficult to find anything even in 3 bedrooms these days, let alone the old traditional 2-bedroom house. So that's the way they're going. I don't think it's the right thing to do, and obviously with more bedrooms comes more price, and it's to keep up with the Joneses type situation, and I don't think that's a sustainable thing in the long run. But anyway, that's my home. That's Australia, and I came out here really with size in mind. You know, I thought, you know, I don't want to be cramped into these little houses. I want room to move. I want space in the house where I can get away from it all. And I had this preconceived idea that, and the only thing that I didn't require is all these bedrooms, but I still found myself looking at large bathrooms and looking at large kitchens and large living room areas, and then attaching 2 bedrooms with the possibility of building more in the long run. And I set to work and I built that container house with that in mind. Since building that container house and having, you know, a huge amount of space, I realised that you know, in this country, not only is it not really appreciated, to a certain degree you make a rod for your own back, and certainly that of your partner, because, you know, they have to clean this great expanse, and the more rooms you have, the more people seem to want to visit you and stay. And Filipinos are very social, and they don't think twice about, you know, starting the party and, whoops, another vehicle, and then staying overnight. So you can find yourself with a number of house guests if you have the room. So that's one thing that I wish I'd never had that amount of room, because, you know, I'm relatively solitary from time to time, and I don't particularly like or feel comfortable with a great deal of people around me. That's me. Getting onto the subject, I was saying, what you've got to consider over here is, one, if you build a house that's already, or if you buy a house that's already built, you're going to have inherited problems from that house, and the building over here is not of the highest quality, and the materials certainly aren't as high, and unfortunately a lot of the Philippines works on, you know, close enough or near enough is good enough. And when it comes to building, you know, that has significant problems in the long term. Close enough is good enough, but that is something you'll run across in this country time and time again. The attitude is close enough is good enough, and almost the Aussie thing about she'll be right. Well, it's not right, and all you're doing is masking a future problem. So if you buy a house over here that's already constructed, and you haven't witnessed the construction and had anything to do with it, and I'm not saying all the time, but you run the risk of unseen problems even in a brand new house, because they do have a tendency to cut corners here, and they try to do it as cheaply as possible to maximise profit, as with all builders. But here they don't have any regulators that'll turn around and say, no, you've got to do it in a specific way. And that goes, you're going to have ongoing problems with houses that are already built in this country, in my experience, in rural and lesser cities. Of drainage is always a monumental problem in most of these houses. The electrical work is a lot to be desired. The roofing is not of the best quality. Insulation half the time is non-existent. So you're going to have these types of things. And there's nothing worse than having plumbing problems and electrical problems, especially if you are not familiar with those yourself and diagnosing them. And if you haven't got the capacity to diagnose, you rely on other people, which unless you know their qualifications, unless you know by people recommending them, you know, are probably as talented at what they're proposed to be doing as you are, which is not very talented in relation to their jobs at all, and they're sucking the lollipop to see what it tastes like as well as you. So keep that in mind. A lot of the times you're going to buy substandard. Then if you get them to build the houses, if you get tradesmen in, or so-called tradesmen to build, be aware that you're going to have to monitor those tradesmen for the entire time that you're there, because out of sight, out of mind, as soon as you leave that, there's a good possibility that those tradesmen will slip back into their old habits and cut those corners. and you must be responsible for everything that goes into that house. Do not rely on somebody else going and buying your supplies and this type of thing, whether it be bricks, whether it be paint, whatever. They will always look for the cheapest possible product, or it's been my experience they do, and they will always assure you that, you know, that's the way it's done over here, and it'll be right. Well, to my surprise, you know, they weren't 100% accurate. I've since found that, you know, had I gone along and done a lot of that work myself and got out of my way, even though it's hot here, even though it's a pain in the ass to do, I would have been a lot happier in the long run. So even building a house over here is a task unto itself. The other thing is too, relying on designs in the Philippines. Even though there's probably a million and one architectural graduates here, the architecture externally is usually pretty good to look at. So artistically and externally, it's rather pleasant to look at. Forget the paint, but the structure unto itself is relatively pleasant. But internally, the layout of houses is not only confusing, you scratch your head and say, why is this toilet coming off the kitchen? And things that really aren't acceptable to us is common practice over here. They fit things where they can possibly fit them, and there's not much thought goes on to the ergonomics or the practicality of where they put things. So if you choose a design, and a lot of people aren't familiar once you see it on a blueprint, sizing. They can't size it in their mind. Everything is small. You know, I was privy to a house that I rented in General Santos, where it was advertised as a 3-bedroom house, 2 main bedrooms and a servant's quarters. Well, let me tell you, the servant's quarters, which was located off the kitchen in this particular unit, was what could only be described as, you know, a walk-in pantry. Yes, theoretically you could throw a mattress on the floor and someone could sleep in there, but you couldn't hand the door open inwards. You certainly couldn't open the door once the mattress was on the ground. And that's, as stupid as that sounds, that's what they consider to be, in a lot of places, room enough for a bed to be placed is therefore a bedroom. So, you know, if you have no understanding of perspective when you're looking at a plan and there's measurements there and you can't picture it in your mind, you know, like, and for a lot of people that are in the trades, they'll think that's a ridiculous statement, but a lot of lay people have great difficulty understanding dimension and size simply by the written measurements on a paper, unless they actually step it out themselves, and which is not done. A lot of older guys think that you're dealing with the experts, so we'll leave it to them. Well, that's a big mistake. But anyway, apart from those things, and that you've got to look at what's available to you in the area of which you're building. You know, simply because you can build concrete houses or block houses in one area, you've got to look at the quality of block. You've got to look at whether or not you can get insulation, because these blocks are only about 4 inches wide and they retain heat, and it's you know, it's rather a little cook box inside. And of course, most of the time they've got either a concrete tile on the roof, or they've got what they call sheen here, which is corrugated iron. And if the building isn't facing the right way, if it isn't designed correctly, it can be very, very hot. This is why a lot of Filipinos actually cook outside in dirty kitchens, because, you know, to obviously it's a lot, get the temperature down where they're cooking. There's an open charcoal fire or there's gas, and they don't want to heat up the interior of the house, let alone the smells. So what I did find, which maybe have helped you, I looked at other forms of building over here, which I would suggest you at least do a little bit of study on, because it may be of some assistance if all you're looking for is residence. Obviously, prices to be kept in mind, sizes to be kept in mind, availability of materials is to be kept in mind. And some of the things in my studies, and one of which I only found after I built the house, I really wish that I'd found before I built that, and I would have built in it, was, and the first and most important, and I will put in an overlay of the YouTube video, as you can probably see now, a YouTuber that does this technique that appears to me, and from what I've found out about the technique, very, very good. and there's a number of reasons for that. It may not be aesthetically as pleasing to you, but in this country you're better off going for practicality than aesthetics. But anyway, that was foamcrete houses. Foamcrete is a relatively new building material. It requires a process, and the biggest drawback of that producing a foamcrete block or whatever it happens to be, or joints, usually is an inability to overcome the manufacturing process. It does take a fair bit of practice. I have done, since I built the house, some experimentation into foam concrete, and it took me a little while to get the right process, to get the consistency and whatever. Just be patient, because the end result is well worth it. This particular building style that this video, as I put up, I suppose promotes, this dome style of building for the tropics, and consider this, is very practical. You know, half the problems you have with buildings over here are roofs, whether it be high wind, whether moisture getting under tin, whether a replacement of tin and whatever, and obviously with a dome structure, you don't have that problem. You know, you don't have leaking gutters. There's a myriad of reasons why you should at least look at that. The other thing about foamcrete is that it's virtually fireproof if it's done correctly. It is an insulator. It's rather than the hollow block that they produce here, even though it's an aerated concrete block, its strength is far greater than the majority of blocks over here. It does have certain techniques within it that you are required to do over and above, but to make it either weatherproof and whatever. But these techniques, I believe, are worth learning if you're going this way. And not only that, things like concrete slabs, or elevated concrete slabs that you may be building on, you can use the same aircrete for that. It's strong enough for that type of purpose. It has a lot of things going for it in relation to wiring and plumbing, because it's a soft material, and because you can virtually cut it up with a wood saw. You can also make areas in the wall for plumbing and wiring rather simply. And these are all things to consider. I won't say too much about it. I'm just recommending that you have a look at these. It doesn't have to be as hippie-like as you see in this video, but that's something that the more I read into it and the more I experimented with it, the more I considered I should have gone that way. And I should have reduced the size of the house, because it wasn't necessary in the end. So size is a thing, and of course if you reduce size in building, you reduce costs. No one wants to come here to a country that you're not 100% sure of and how long you're going to be here, and spend an absolute fortune in anticipation that you're going to sell it and make profit. That doesn't always happen. In fact, especially in rural areas, if people know you're selling and going back to a country, they'll actually outweight you to reduce the price, knowing that you're leaving, you've got to get rid of it. A lot of the times you won't get your asking price, because they'll just simply outweight you. They'll even wait for you to go home and have it standing there for a period of time, and then make a lower offer. And by that time the psychology is, well, like you're not there, you're in foreign country. These people aren't silly. They understand how to work a deal in their favour. So anyway, have a look at the video. I think it's an excellent product. Everything that's in that video is available here in the Philippines. The actual foaming device can be purchased at a very low cost. The Filipinos, once you train them, understand concrete. So it's a medium that they're familiar with, and it's not too radical. But that's one. The second one, if you're looking at building, I think we'll go back to the 60s and the 70s, but take into account ease of building. If you're not that experienced, one of the easiest buildings to construct, and it has its pros and cons as well, I'm not suggesting it doesn't, but we're talking about building a structure that keeps the rain off you, that keeps the weather away, and you can sleep in and do the bare minimum. We're not talking about Home Beautiful here. Is the A-framed house. Now, the reason I suggest A-framed houses, no, they aren't particularly aesthetically charming and beautiful. There's nothing really wonderful about it. But there are many areas in the Philippines where I think Swiss and German influences via expats have come over, settled there, and they've produced A-frame houses. There's a number of areas in Mindanao that are really noted for A-frame houses, and they do have German immigrants or Swiss immigrants living there, and it's a very simple building method. There's a huge amount of space interior-wise that may or may not be lost depending on how you utilise it. But the good thing about it is sheen, and reasonable quality sheen or corrugated iron is available over here. The insulation qualities are good, except for the second floor. You must realise that hot air rises, and it does sometimes if it's not insulated, the roof's not insulated correctly as far as extraction of that hot air. It can get warm on the second floor if you build a two-storey one. But ease of construction is probably one of those things that amateur builders such as myself and a lot of you guys that want to have a crack at it, is something to look at. And it's totally functional. Again, you don't have the gutter problems over here because the walls consist of two roof lines. But again, go into and have a look at those. Bamboo's another big one over here, treated bamboo, where a lot of younger people especially come over and they're arty crafty and they want to be with nature and they want to leave a low carbon footprint, so they actually choose bamboo. Now you can get pre-manufactured bamboo houses over here, but they don't last very long. They're just tacked together. They're quaint for about 12 months. They allow bugs in and whatever. But there is architecturally designed bamboo houses available online, and you can get a lot of ideas. They are very, very pretty to look at. But by the time, because they're labour intensive, you go into it, they can be expensive to build and time consuming to build. But the end result speaks for itself. You are in the tropics, you are in Southeast Asia. That's wonderful. Another one we looked at, as I mentioned beforehand, I came from Thailand. My original thought was to bring a kit home from Thailand made out of teak into the country, because I loved the design of both Balinese houses and Thai houses, and kits for both of those countries are available if you source them. It is expensive to bring kits in, or can be expensive, because duty, you've got to pay for duty and whatever. But if your budget is such and you have made up your mind, have a look at those. As I said, you can get them sent from Thailand, shipped across in a container, pay the duty, and they are a fabulous hardwood house that is resistant to white ant and termite, and you'll have something different. The other thing that you can explore, Alibaba over here, we get a lot of stuff sent in from China, and China does some fabulous things as far as prefabricated houses are concerned. From an Australian's point of view, we do a lot of steel shed kits in Australia. You may even consider bringing over a prefabricated steel shed in a container and assembling it here and then insulating it or whatever. But be aware that insulation is difficult in some places to obtain, and you may have to do a bit of running around to get it. But that's another one. So the things like the Quakers barn type situation and all that, that may be an area to look at. But do your homework before you come. Remember the limitations. You are not going to get the choice over here in a lot of areas that you will have, even going to a Bunnings store in Australia or some of the stores that you'll get in the United States. It's going to be very, very limited. Carpets and things like that are just a waste of time. Tiles are the thing. Polished concrete's becoming very popular over here. That's good if you're a builder and you know how to do it. Getting the equipment to do so may be a little bit difficult. It's easier in major centres, but when you get rural, it becomes a little bit trickier. But if you're energetic and enthusiastic and you want to have a go, I'm only suggesting have a go, because the feeling at the end of the day that you actually produced it and you're relatively self-sufficient is a wonderful feeling. Anyway guys, there are only some thoughts on building. If you want to know anything, I'm only too happy to answer some questions. It is limiting over here, but it is, as with everything in the Philippines, it's a challenge. And if you stick it out and you get through that challenge, the rewards, personal rewards, are ever so great. Rightio, that's it for today, my meanderings. Subscribe, as I said, thumbs up, send us a message, share with your friends, and thanks again to my first 1,000 subscribers. Cheers for now.